Imagine two neighbors. Same street, same zip code, same school district for their kids. The first one drives a new truck, takes 2 vacations a year, eats out 3 times a week, and just renovated his kitchen. By every visible measure, the man is doing well. He feels successful. His neighbors think he is. The second one drives a 9-year-old sedan, packs lunch, hasn't touched his kitchen since 2014. You would not look at him and think, money. 10 years pass. The first guy files for bankruptcy. The second guy retires at 53. Same street, completely different financial realities. And here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. For most of that decade, the first guy had more money coming in. So what went wrong? Or more precisely, what went right for the second one? This is not a story about frugality. It is not a lecture about spending less on coffee. What happened between those two men is the difference between prosperity and wealth. And most people, including a lot of financially literate people, treat those two words like synonyms. They are not synonyms. They're not even close. And confusing them is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Here's what's strange about this moment in history. We are, by almost every measurable standard, living through one of the most prosperous periods human civilization has ever produced. Global GDP crossed $100 trillion for the first time in 2022. The number of people living in extreme poverty has dropped from 36% of the world's population in 1990 to under 9% today. The average American household has access to more technology, more food variety, more entertainment, more mobility, and more medical intervention than any king or emperor who ever lived. And yet, a 2023 Federal Reserve survey found that 37% of American adults could not cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing money or selling something. $400 in the wealthiest country that has ever existed. That is not a contradiction. That is the gap between prosperity and wealth playing out in real time, at national scale. Understanding this gap is not just an intellectual exercise. It changes how you make decisions. It changes what you optimize for. It changes whether the next decade of your life builds something durable or just looks good from the outside. So let's take it apart.
Prosperity, at its core, is about flow. It is income. It is consumption. It is the steady current of money moving through your life. Prosperity is what lets you afford things. It is why a surgeon earning $400,000 a year feels rich, why a mid-level tech employee with a generous bonus feels like things are going well, why a small business owner having a record month feels successful. Prosperity is real. It is not fake or meaningless, but it is fundamentally a present tense condition. It tells you how things are right now. It does not tell you anything durable about tomorrow. Wealth, on the other hand, is about stock. Not stock like equities, though that can be part of it. Stock as in accumulated reserves. Wealth is what remains when the flow stops. It is the assets you own minus the liabilities you carry. It is the number that answers a very specific and uncomfortable question. If your income disappeared tomorrow, how long could you sustain your life before something broke? Prosperity is a river. Wealth is a reservoir. And most of modern consumer life is designed deliberately, expertly, at enormous expense to keep you focused on the river and completely distracted from the reservoir. Think about that for a moment. Every advertisement you have ever seen was selling you prosperity. A better car, a nicer kitchen, a vacation that signals to the people in your life that you were doing well. None of that builds a reservoir. All of it drains one. Now here's where the math starts to get quietly brutal. The United States median household income in 2023 was approximately $74,500. That sounds like enough to build something. And for most of history, it probably was. But let's walk through where that money actually goes. Federal and state income taxes, payroll taxes, and in many states, local taxes consume somewhere between 22 and 28% of gross income for a median earner. Call it 25%. That's roughly $18,600 gone before the household sees it.
That leaves about $55,900 in take-home pay. Housing. The median rent for a two-bedroom apartment in America passed $2,000 a month in 2022 and hasn't come down meaningfully since. That's $24,000 a year. If you own and you bought in the last 5 years, your mortgage, property taxes, and insurance are probably in the same neighborhood or higher. Transportation. The average American household spends about $10,000 a year on transportation: car payments, insurance, fuel, maintenance. Food. Roughly $8,000 to $9,000 annually for a typical household when you include groceries and dining out. Healthcare. Even with employer-sponsored insurance, out-of-pocket costs for a family average around $5,000 per year. Add those together: housing, transportation, food, healthcare. You are already at roughly $47,000 to $48,000 on a take-home of $55,900. That leaves approximately $8,000 for everything else: childcare, clothing, utilities, subscriptions, the birthday party, the car repair that was not in the plan, the dental work insurance did not cover. $8,000 of margin in a country where a single emergency room visit without complications costs an average of $2,200. There is your $400 emergency fund problem. It is not a character flaw, it is arithmetic. But here's where it gets philosophically interesting, because that arithmetic is real, but it is not fixed. And the people who end up wealthy, genuinely wealthy, not just high income, are the ones who found the fulcrum in that equation and pushed on it deliberately. Let's talk about how wealth actually accumulates, because the mechanism is not complicated, but it is deeply counterintuitive to the way most of us were raised to think about money. Wealth builds through 3 forces working together over time. The first is margin, the gap between what comes in and what goes out. This is obvious, but the size of the margin matters less than people assume. Research from wealth psychology, yes, that is a real field, consistently finds that people who build significant wealth over time are usually not the highest earners in their social circles. They are the people with the widest margins relative to their income. They are protecting a percentage, not a dollar amount. The second force is asset conversion, taking that margin and converting it into things that generate returns without requiring your continued labor. Stocks, real estate, a business stake, a royalty, something that works while you sleep. This is the step most people skip because spending feels immediate and buying an index fund feels abstract. The third force is time. And this one is where the math becomes almost philosophically unreasonable. Albert Einstein may or may not have called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world. He probably did not, but whoever did understood something important. If you invest $500 a month starting at 25 and earn a 7% annual return, which is roughly the long-run historical average for a diversified U.S. stock portfolio after inflation, by the time you were 65, you have approximately $1.3 million. If you wait until you are 35 to start, same $500 a month, same return, you end up with about $606,000. 10 years of delay cost you $700,000. You did not lose that money, you simply never did not do the thing that would have created it. The absence of action was the most expensive purchase you ever made, and it never showed up on a single receipt. Now let's name the thing that stands between most people and that compounding process, because it is not laziness, it is not stupidity, it is something far more structural and far more invisible. It is called lifestyle inflation, and it is almost perfectly calibrated to consume every dollar of margin you ever generate. Here's how it works. You're 26, you get a promotion. Your salary goes from $58,000 to $72,000. That's $14,000 more per year, $1,166 more per month.
You feel like you have arrived. What happens to that $1,166? You move to a nicer apartment. The extra space costs $400 a month more. You start going to nicer restaurants. There goes another $200. You upgrade your car because the old one was fine, but this one has the heated seats and the good stereo, and you earned it. That is another $350 a month. You are now at $950 of new monthly spending on a $1,166 raise. And you feel genuinely like you are being reasonable. You are not living recklessly. You are living proportionally to your new income. You give yourself $216 of actual margin improvement. Not zero, but also not what a $14,000 raise should produce. Do that 3 or 4 times over a career, which is the statistical norm, and you arrive at 52, earning $130,000 a year with the same financial fragility you had at 26. More comfort, yes. More security, no. This is the trap, and it is not a moral failing. It is the default setting. Society, advertising, your peer group, the upgrade options built into every app and service you use, all of it is pointing in the same direction. Spend the increase. The people who build wealth are not immune to this pressure. They just learn to name it, and naming it is more powerful than it sounds. Let's zoom out for a moment, because this dynamic does not just play out in individual households, it plays out in entire economies, in entire nations. And when you see it at that scale, something shifts in how you understand your own situation. The United States has the largest GDP in the world. In 2023, it hit approximately $27 trillion. The country produces, consumes, and circulates more value than any economy in history. It also has a household savings rate that has been on a decline for decades. In the 1970s, Americans saved roughly 12% of disposable income. By 2005, that had dropped to 2.5%. Post-pandemic, it bounced up briefly as people had nowhere to spend money and the government was sending checks. Then it settled back down. In early 2024, it was sitting around 3.6%. 3.6% savings rate in the most prosperous nation on Earth. That is a country with a very large, very fast river and a very shallow reservoir. Contrast that with Japan, where households historically save 15 to 20% of income, or Singapore, where mandatory pension contributions mean the government is essentially forcing a savings behavior that the market would not produce on its own. Different cultures, different systems, very different reservoirs. Or look at the distribution within America. The top 10% of households by wealth own approximately 67% of all wealth in the country. The bottom 50% own about 2.5%. And here's the part that tends to get lost in the political arguments around those statistics. A meaningful portion of the people in the bottom half are not low income. They are median income or above. They just spent it. The wealth gap is not only a gap between high earners and low earners, it's a gap between people who converted income into assets and people who converted income into consumption. That is the distinction almost no one talks about because it does not fit neatly into any political narrative. It's just the math, sitting there, quietly, indifferent to who you vote for.
Now here is where the irony lives. The very systems that generate prosperity often work against the accumulation of wealth. And the more sophisticated those systems get, the more precisely targeted that opposition becomes. Think about the credit industry. Access to credit is a genuine marker of economic development. It allows people to smooth out income shocks, invest in education, buy homes, start businesses. All of that is real and valuable. It also allows people to spend money they do not have on things that depreciate the moment they leave the store at interest rates that guarantee the final price will be significantly higher than the sticker price. The average American carries about $6,000 in credit card debt, at an average interest rate of around 22%, which is where rates landed after the Fed's hiking cycle. That debt costs roughly $1,300 a year just to exist every year, without touching the principal.
that is not a loan. That is a subscription to your own financial stagnation. The financial services industry is extraordinarily good at packaging debt as convenience, and packaging consumption as lifestyle. And the people designing these products are extremely smart, extremely well compensated, and entirely focused on one goal: maximizing the amount you spend and the duration over which you are obligated to keep paying. This is not a conspiracy, it is just incentive alignment. They get paid when you borrow and spend. They do not get paid when you save and compound. Understanding that your financial environment is optimized against your long-term interests is not paranoia, it's just accurate. And once you see it clearly, you can stop fighting yourself and start navigating the actual terrain. Let's talk about what genuine wealth actually looks like. Not the fantasy version with yachts and private jets, which is a very small slice of the actual distribution. The version that is accessible to a far larger portion of the population than participates in it. There is a concept in financial planning called the financial independence number. It is the point at which your invested assets generate enough passive return to cover your living expenses indefinitely. The standard formulation, known as the 4% rule, derived from a 1994 paper by 3 professors at Trinity University, suggests that if your portfolio is large enough that 4% of it covers your annual expenses, you have achieved a level of wealth where paid work becomes optional. If your annual expenses are $50,000, your number is $1.25 million. If your expenses are $80,000, your number is $2 million. These are not trivial numbers, but they are not astronomical numbers either. They are achievable by ordinary income earners over a career of 2 to 3 decades, without inheritance, without luck, without genius, with nothing other than consistent margin, consistent conversion into assets, and time. The reason most people do not get there has nothing to do with math ability or access to information. The information is freely available, has been for decades. What stops people is the prosperity trap, the relentless gravitational pull of the visible present against the invisible future. The new truck feels real, the retirement account balance feels abstract, so the truck wins, repeatedly, until the math catches up. There is also a softer version of this distinction that rarely gets discussed, because wealth and prosperity are not only about net worth statements and investment accounts. Prosperity is also a feeling. It is the subjective experience of having enough, of living fully, of not feeling pinched or stressed about the monthly numbers. And that experience, the psychological reality of prosperity, is not perfectly correlated with income. Research from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, led by economists Angus Dayton and Daniel Kahneman, found that emotional well-being rises with income up to around $75,000 per year, and then the relationship flattens significantly. After that point, more money does not reliably produce more day-to-day happiness. A more recent study from Matthew Killingsworth at the University of Pennsylvania found that happiness does continue to rise with income above that threshold, but with diminishing returns and with important caveats about how the money is earned and spent. The consistent finding across this research is that what drives sustained life satisfaction is not the income number. It is autonomy, the freedom to choose how you spend your time, the absence of financial stress, the sense that you have options. And those things, autonomy, optionality, the ability to say no to work or obligations that compromise your life, are products of wealth, not prosperity. You can feel prosperous and be completely trapped. If your lifestyle requires your income to sustain itself, then your income owns you. You are not wealthy, you are renting a lifestyle from your employer, and they set the terms. Genuine wealth is what gives you back the lease on your own time. That is why people who achieve it consistently describe it not in terms of possessions, but in terms of freedom. The freedom to walk away from a bad job, to spend 6 months on something that might not work, to absorb a financial shock without derailing your life. The truck feels like prosperity. The option to walk away feels like wealth.
So, where does this leave you? Not with a 5-step plan. This is not that kind of conversation, but with a reframe. Every financial decision you make is, at some level, a vote between the river and the reservoir, between the present version of your life feeling good and the future version of your life having options. Neither is inherently wrong. Spending on experiences and comfort and the people you love is not a moral failure. Living well today matters, but knowing what you are trading, clearly, eyes open, without the noise of advertising and social comparison distorting your perception, changes the quality of the choice. The guy with the new truck was not a fool. He just did not realize he was spending his future optionality on present signaling. He was performing wealth without building it, and the performance was convincing enough that even he believed it for a while. The neighbor in the 9-year-old sedan was not a martyr. He was not grinding through a joyless existence in service to a spreadsheet. He was just clear about what he was building and why. The sedan was not a sacrifice. It was a statement of priorities. Here's the question that nobody in personal finance seems to want to sit with. What happens to a society where the infrastructure of daily life, housing costs, healthcare costs, debt markets, digital advertising, social media comparison is optimized to maximize present consumption, where the systems surrounding ordinary people make the reservoir harder and harder to fill? Individual discipline can overcome individual circumstances, marginally, for some people, in some situations. But when the median household has $8,000 of annual margin after essential expenses, and that margin is being targeted by some of the most sophisticated marketing and credit machinery ever built, individual discipline starts to look like a rowboat in a current. The prosperity versus wealth distinction is real, and learning it matters. But perhaps the more important question is why the gap between them has been widening for 50 years. Who benefits from that widening, and whether any of the systems that shape the economic lives of ordinary people are oriented toward closing it? That question does not have a comfortable answer, which probably explains why you don't hear it asked very often.